Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's time for some more health talks with Dr. Trinh. The one show, the only show that shows you a path to a healthier life, one conversation at a time, with the man who's always in conversation with the most interesting people, Dr. Trinh. Welcome, sir.
Hey, thank you, Paul. Good morning. Good morning, Tom. I want to introduce my friend, Tom O'Neill, calling in from the East Coast, actually. We want to discuss a very important computerized device today that solves a gap that we have in the United States today, which is going out and then looking for folks who may have concerns with their memory and their cognition overall. And so Cogniview is the organization that we're going to bring on today, and Tom is part of that.
Right. Excellent.
Let me see if I understand this. It's a cognitive testing device, and this is the first one ever, whatever you say, approved or cleared by the FDA to test your memory and other things?
It's a great question, Paul. So there have been a number of cognitive testing tools out there for the last 30 or 40 years, but they've all been paper and pencil type tools, things you might have heard of, MoCA or MMSE, those types of things. And they are 30 or 40 years old, and they're very good, and they're used by a lot of clinicians. But back in 2015, our founder, Dr. Duffy, he took the first computerized test of cognition, Cogniview, through the FDA clearance process and got approval or clearance for our technology. And what it is, it's self-administered, self-scored, and it only takes about 10 minutes. So we actually have two devices. One's a screener for 5 minutes, Cogniview Thrive, and then there's the 10-minute, a deeper assessment that is Cogniview.
And what happens? Walk us through. I don't know if we can do one of these live or something here, but I'd love to figure out, is you say it's not just pen and paper, it's something online, but it's self-administered. What do I do?
Yeah, so let me clarify. So let's talk about the 10-minute Cogniview Clarity device. It's 10 assessments, 10 exercises in 10 minutes. So it's not question and answer, because I think, that's something that kind of worries people, right? When they hear that it's question and answer, they get very concerned. Ours is not a question and answer. It's 10 exercises. And those exercises, the first two are motor skills and visual acuity.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're measuring your motor skills and your visual acuity, they don't go into the overall score at the end. But what they do, because our technology is unique in that it takes those and adapts the rest of the sub exercises or sub tests to that person's motor and visual ability. And the reason being, Paul, is we don't want to measure somebody's motor and vision. We want to really try to isolate their cognitive function, their brain health.
Right.
And then it takes them through 4 perception and 4 memory tests. Perception being letter, word, shape, and motion. And then memory test, letter, word, shape, and motion. And then through our algorithm, it's adapting to each individual's own abilities, so that if you're doing really good, it gets harder. If you're not doing as good, it slows it down and makes it a little bit easier for you. So you're really getting a really good personalized assessment of your own brain health or your own cognition.
And it's a snapshot.
Then it rolls up to an overall score.
It's a snapshot in the moment, though. It says, exactly, here's where I am today. Right.
Paul, that's a great point. Yes, absolutely.
So how do you use this, Dr. Trinh? How do doctors use this?
A physician in a typical medical office, you get your 10, 15 minutes with a patient.
Right. If that.
if that. And if somebody comes up and say, I have memory concerns, and first of all, the testing that we do today that docs know and are aware is a typical mini mental state examination test, which has been around forever, but it's not a very sensitive test. If you're looking for small, slight changes with that, we need to find problems before they become real problems.
Yeah.
And so this device, the reason I really like this device is that you don't need a trained psychologist to administer this. This device, somebody turns on the switch. It's a laptop, is what it looks like. It's like bringing your laptop, opening the laptop, and then it folds out a little bit. And this device self-administers and kind of runs on his own with your patient without requiring a
Does it prompt you to read something? Does it ask questions verbally? What does this
no
thing?
questions. It's got this little wheel. It's kind of like a little joystick. If you think about playing a game, like a computer game with a little joystick, it's similar to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're playing a game while the computer is actually analyzing.
Here we go. Now we're going to see one here. Something.
Oh, there you go.
There we
There
go.
you go.
So
Yeah,
it does kind of look like it's got some little isolation screen around it so you can see it. And then you kind of sit in front of this thing and do what? You move this little wheel on the screen or something? Yeah.
Absolutely. It feels like you're playing a game as opposed to being tested.
Yeah, right.
So it's very neat. And within 5 to 10 minutes, you get an official result. You get a score that tells your doctor how you're doing with your memory and your cognition.
So let me ask a hard question here, both of you. My late mother had Parkinson's, as we've talked about in this show. And as she got worse, she developed dementia. We weren't ready for that. Nobody had prepared us for that. And I remember the doctor giving her some set of blocks at some point in time, like a little kid would do, like my 2-year-old grandson would do. Can you put the square block in the square hole?
Right.
And she sat for 40 minutes and tried to jam the square box into a round hole. And she was just it just broke our heart to watch this thing. It broke her heart too. Do we avoid knowing just because it's heartbreaking to see, oh my God, I can't believe I can't figure this out. Oh my God, I can't believe you don't see put it in this box there. Is there a pressure to perform that lets you just say, the heck with it, I'm not going to do this?
The good news with this device is that you can't really tell how you did because you're playing a game.
Good. Okay.
Yeah,
it's not obvious that, oh my God, that you're really failing this.
Yeah, it doesn't make you look like you have apparent issues, right? So you're playing a little game, and when you're done playing the game, it spits out a result that your doctor helps to interpret for you. But it's not like you're looking at it and you're saying, I can't do this, put this block in this hole and all that stuff. And
I remember my mother crying and my dad crying with her where she couldn't do this simple task. So they never did that test again because it was traumatic. Right.
Yeah, one of the things that you highlighted, and I think this is a big deal, is those paper and pencil tests or the block test. They are very difficult for patients because somebody is administering them, somebody's watching over them.
Yes.
And so it does feel like a lot of pressure on them.
Right.
To kind of take your question and answer it also a different way, the biggest disease that worries or concerns people in the U.S. is dementia or Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
More than anything, more than cancer, more than heart disease all combined. And if you think about it, the people that, like you, the caretakers of your mom or of your dad or your aunt, your uncle, your grandma, your grandpa, when they see a loved one who has dementia or Alzheimer's, we call them the worried well. So they start to think, oh, maybe I have that in me at some point.
I'm raising my hand. Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So when you think like people just don't want to know, and Dr. Trin's amazing attendance at his community events would tell you different. I would say we've done health fairs at employers and in communities where we have to stay an extra 2 hours to get through the waiting list of people that want to do it. So I think there is, in the healthcare system today, we test for everything consistently except your brain health or your brain function.
Right.
So Dr. Trin is working with us and helping us to get the word out because we're talking about, we don't test for dementia or Alzheimer's, we test for cognitive impairment. We test for it before it becomes, like Dr. Trin said, something more significant. But if we can get this into the conversation, this isn't just a healthcare issue. This is a society issue. When you think about those, they predict about 50 million right, in the next 20 years that are going to be afflicted with some level of dementia, and all the caretakers that are carrying a tremendous burden with that.
I was, and it was hard to watch her go through this, but part of us were in denial. That day when we saw it visually, oh, mom's just getting a little old. She said, we just assume you're getting a little old, you're getting a little slow. Yeah. There's no real problem here. When she couldn't do what we assume a 3-year-old could do, put the block in the right hole, that was heartbreaking for her because she could visually see it. Oh my God, I really have gone downhill. And my dad could see it and I could see it and everybody got upset and we never did it again.
Yeah, I think, and Dr. Trinh can definitely speak more to this with regards to his actual patients, but one of the things that we've learned over the years is people that are dealing with any type of cognitive impairment or early signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, get really good at kind of hiding it, right?
Yeah.
And they hide it because they don't want to lose their independence.
Right.
They hide it because they don't want to give up their keys or they don't want to go into assisted living. And we really do understand that, but they get to where they also want to stay in their same place because that's the routine. They know when they get up from the bed, they turn right to go to the bathroom, they turn left to go to the kitchen.
Right.
And we, as the children or the caretakers, many times we don't see it because we may only talk to them on the phone, FaceTime them for 15 minutes. But at the holidays, when we start seeing them for 3, 4, 5 days at a time, we start to recognize something's off about mom or dad, right? Or
Right.
something's off about grandma and grandpa. So our whole mission is about testing people, earlier to drive better outcomes because there are things that we can empower the patients to manage.
I was going to say, so what do you do once you determine that a change has taken place? And let's be clear, I think we had somebody on from Alzheimer's a few years ago, and he said it was the group that Dr. Trin's with. What's the guy's name? Jim McAleer was on.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim said something I'll never forget, that because we're living longer, something startling, 80% of us or something will have some sort of cognitive decline over time. It's inevitable. Our brains wear out. We used to die at 60. Now we're dying at 90, many of us, or my dad died in his 90s and whatnot. So if that's the case, is this just an inevitable thing that we should just accept and prepare for? Or is there something, Dr. Trinh, to do with this data once you determine there's a loss?
There is a lot that can be done. And that's one of the barriers of misconception that we need to address, is that memory loss is not a normal process of aging. And
because that's what I'm hearing, well, just accept it. You're all going to live longer. Your brain's going to decline. That's just the way it is.
This is exactly why Alzheimer's is the number 3 cause of death in Orange County, because we're not looking, we're not addressing, and we're not being proactive.
No.
And our mission is to get the word out that there is a lot of things you can do if you detect early problems with your memory. And a lot of these things that you can do does not require a pill.
Right.
Yes.
Recent study just published within the last 2 weeks, showing that it took 2 groups of folks diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like the pre-Alzheimer's stage, when your symptoms are super mild, but it's not affecting your daily, activities and things of that sort.
But you notice I forget, or I misplace things, or I'm not sure how to do something.
So they put the first group into a scheduled exercise program, where you're working out for half an hour 4 or 5 days a week, and the other group just kind of lived life normally.
Right.
And so they followed these 2 groups for about a year. And if you know anything about mild cognitive impairment, there is a rate of progression over time where your memory declines and you fall into that mild Alzheimer's stage. And so the group that was exercising on a regular basis did not decline at all after a year in their memory.
Wow.
And so there's, these are examples of things that we can do if we detect potential.
How about brain exercises? I periodically see apps on my phone. Hey, play this game and strengthen your mind.
Absolutely.
I've read that before. If you exercise the body, do you have to exercise the mind? Do you have to do sort of...
Absolutely. I was at UC Irvine yesterday hanging out with Professor Craig Stark, and a really good guy. He is an expert in the world of gaming and memory.
Oh, we should get him on.
Looking at his data.
Let's get him on sometime. What a fascinating idea.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I was biological science, right? Building 3 yesterday. And so he has published data, hundreds of patients playing Mario Brother. Remember that game?
Yeah. And he jumps over the things.
Yep. In all age group, seniors, young folks, but especially the seniors. And they would play Mario Brothers for a few weeks. He would test baseline memory, follow-up memory. It made a difference in their cognition.
Wow.
This is published material. So imagine that, right? Imagine that. Things that you can do, including playing video games for your memory, but you need to be tested
You need to know
that there is a problem or an issue.
So if you have, I'll ask one more question on this and we'll get back to Tom's device here, but if you see a decline and you start to do brain exercises, you start to do body strengthening, whatnot, you're saying there's some studies that show you can stop the decline or slow the decline. Can you reverse the decline ever? Can you get back to where you were, or is it like when it's lost, it's lost?
Well, not every memory loss problem is Alzheimer's related.
Yeah.
Right? So, but you need to first figure out if memory loss is even a problem, which is why you need a device like CogniView that doesn't require a psychologist or an MD to administer it, because there isn't enough psychologists and MDs
or shame you into not taking it again. Right.
Absolutely. And so that's what I love about this device, is that you can have a medical assistant, you can have, Uncle Joe, somebody who's trained to just open it up, turn it on. And the cool thing about this device is that you don't need preparation or pre-training to actually utilize and do the test, because it has a pre-training type video that tells you, what to expect. And you get a practice session, things of that sort, right? It's pretty much automated in itself without bias from an interpreter.
Talk about that, Tom, because that was, a lot of this is subjective. Is that normal? Is that not normal? Is that just nervousness? Because my mother got nervous taking tests anyway. She was one of those people. Anytime you gave her a test, she would fail, even when she was healthy. The pressure of performing suddenly made her do dumb things. And my daughter's kind of like that too. Is that one of the appeals of this? Is that it's not subject to bias of somebody's interpretation?
Yeah, and I think that's where those 30 and 40-year-old paper and pencil tests that I talk about, those are administered by somebody, whether it's a nurse or a doctor, and certainly they're clinicians and they do know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But everybody just has some, inherent variability or bias on how they introduce something, how they assess something, how they score something. So yeah, our test is, as Dr. Trinh said, it has an intro video. So everybody hears the same introduction. It's not variable by the location or the doctor. It is self-administered, which means they just take it themselves through it, and then it's self-scored. So one of the things, and I'd love to hear Dr. Trin's thought on this, is as you guys were talking about the things you could do, whether it's diet, exercise, lifestyle, sleep disorders, these types of things that all have or can have an impact on cognition. We'll hear regularly from doctors that, they already coach their patients to eat better and to exercise better. And I guess my response to that is, but here you have a report and you have kind of a point of inflection to say, hey, this is happening. You need to do something about it. I didn't start taking Lipitor and start eating differently until I saw my cholesterol numbers.
Yeah, me too.
So I think this gives, and Dr. Trinh, I don't know if you agree, but I think this gives that kind of spring into, hey, I have to take some action now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it takes me 20 seconds to tell somebody to go exercise and watch your diet. It means nothing. They walk out the door and they see me in another 6 months. Nothing changes, right? There's no incentive. I mean, knowledge is not enough, just general knowledge. You need to actually have the data about what's going on with you. With that, because knowledge is free. Anyone can go on YouTube to learn about anything they want, right?
And maybe it's just that coming to grips with it, facing it, because we all dismiss it. I had a bad day. I'm just tired. I'm getting a little older. So what? I'll tell you, that's one of the biases. I became very agitated about this as my mother and my late father, I took care of both of them, I'm an only child, fell to me. And my late aunt, as I've talked about here, my mother's sister, never got married. So I went through this 3 times, 3 of them declining, 3 of them getting older, 3 of them eventually dying and passing away. And I watched all of that and was the caregiver for 3 of them. And the one thing that made me crazy was everybody would just say, well, they're old.
Right.
They're old. Talk about a bias. Well, so old people aren't supposed to have it together. Old people are just supposed to be sick and declining, and this is just normal.
Hey, Paul, I think we have to get to a point where whether you're in your 20s, your 30s, that when you go for your annual checkup, or if you're younger and you don't go every year, but you go every few years, it should just become a part of the process.
Amen.
You can have some type of cognitive impairment, either from things like a concussion, medications that you might be on, different this you if you have, I'm not talking about had a rough night of sleep, I'm talking about like long-term sleep apnea issues, which can happen, right, as you're when you're younger.
Yeah.
But if we can get it to become a more normal part of the conversation, and I do think COVID has been absolutely horrible, right, to the world. But in particular, one of the things that it did do is it raised the level of awareness around risk factors. Risk factors being diabetes, exercise, all these things that could
obesity, you're overweight, you got diabetes, everything.
Yeah, so
suddenly you've got a comorbidity. You've got a higher chance of dying.
But now that's part of the normal, discussion or conversation with people. So as Dr. Trinh and all the other thousands and thousands of doctors are talking to their patients about risk factors, like the patients now understand that better, I think, because of the last 2 years than they did prior to that.
Right. So what do you think, Dr. Trinh? The one thing that I've always been amazed is we spend so much time and money monitoring our bodies, measuring our weight, watching our vital signs, blood pressure, cholesterol, everything. I don't know anybody that doesn't do all of that anymore. Very few of us ignore that stuff. But when it comes to the brain, we don't talk about it. We don't explore it. We don't measure it like Tom's talking about. And I don't know that we do much about it. If you're upset, you're upset. If you're depressed, you're depressed. We'll give you a pill. If you're declining cognitively, we ignore it, or we don't know what to do about it. Why is the brain not seen as another organ in your body?
The brain has mental health and cognitive health has oftentimes taken a back seat to like diabetes.
I think so.
Tension and cholesterol and things of that sort. And the issue is that because of that backseat view, Alzheimer's is the one disease among maybe the top 10 killers where the rate of death has been increasing over the last few years.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We've cut down, right? Cancer rate of death. We've been able to cut down heart disease and stroke and things of that sort. While major diseases are going down this way, Alzheimer's is on the way up.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Absolutely. And not only is it a personal problem, because it's not just a problem with the patient, the entire family's involved.
Oh, boy. Right? Isn't that the truth?
Parents, siblings, spouses. And
I never had, I'll tell you what, and that's an interesting point. So my father had leukemia, my late father, among many other problems he had. It never impacted my life one bit, or as his caretaker. He took a pill. He watched what he ate. He was careful not to be around people who were sick because he had lower white blood cells to fight stuff. He took some steps and we did it, but it didn't really have much of a major impact. But when he started stumbling and falling, oh my goodness, that was just the worst of all worlds. And eventually that's what killed him. He stumbled and fell and hit his head. And part of it had to be kind of a cognitive decline that he was doing.
Yeah, we work with the American Institute of Balance. Dr. Richard Gans runs that organization, and he's a strong proponent and partner of ours. But there's been a direct, and it's published, a direct correlation between that balance, vestibular, and cognition. And so I think Paul, it's a great catch. And I'm very sorry to hear about your mom and your dad, your aunt's passing, and the difficulty that they went through. But I think this all kind of goes back to, we have to do more education, which is what I love about what we're doing here today, is informing, educating, making it less scary. Because it's not. It's
more acceptable to talk about. I was frustrated when I talked to even friends or other family members, cousins or whatnot. Nobody wanted to hear about them falling and stumbling. They would wince. Oh, don't tell me about that. I could tell them all day long that my dad had a stroke. He did have a stroke, but that was okay, stroke, and everybody, that was open. We could talk about it and everything here. But when I'd say, Dad's fallen, or Mom's not very sharp anymore, Mom, or whatever. I'll give you another one. Everybody's going to wince now when I go into this one here. One of the ways you can get cognitive decline, not permanent, but it looks like Alzheimer's, is when you get urinary tract infections.
Yep.
And my mom and my aunt, when they went to the bathroom, I guess they didn't wipe or clean themselves real well, and they got urinary tract infections all the time. So not only did they feel like they had the flu and they were weak, but all of a sudden I could see my aunt in particular did not suffer from mental decline.
Yep.
And I would say, I bet she's got a urinary tract infection. And we'd take her in. Sure enough, I never knew. Why doesn't nobody told me that? I never heard anybody talk about it. Is that true, Dr. Trinh? And why is that such a secret? Because, we don't want to talk about Mom can't go to the bathroom and take care of herself very well.
All the time in the emergency room. So I'm in the ER at least once a week, admitting patients. And oftentimes, unfortunately, fairly common reasons for hospital admission is somebody comes in and they're confused.
Yeah.
And everyone's trying to figure out, why is this person confused? Usually an older patient. And guess what? It's a urinary tract infection.
Yeah.
So infections drive your cognition.
Well, let me get this out a little further for anybody listening. Talk about urinary tract infections. Don't make this a forbidden subject. We'll tell you that my late aunt, she died in her 90s too. I remember looking at a picture of her here in the studio. I remember the time she'd done this over and over and over and over again. And then she said, "What's wrong with me?" And, she would get confused. She'd get foggy. And that was I began to realize that was a sign of, let's go get this tested. And sure enough, there it was. So one time after the 12th visit to emergency rooms over a number of years, it seems like, I went to the female doctor that was seeing her that day. I said, "What can I do?" She said, "Talk to her." I said, "I can't talk to her about this issue." I said, "Why don't you talk to her about this issue?" So together we went in and she said, "Well, I've got something we've got to talk about. I know it's a little embarrassing, but can you talk about when you go to the bathroom?" My aunt, who was the sweetest old lady, I never saw anybody get so angry at me and so embarrassed. We're not talking about this. Absolutely. I'm not 3 years old. I'm not going to discuss how I go to the bathroom here with you or anybody, particularly in front of him, my nephew. We ain't doing this. And it didn't go anywhere. And I tried to press it a couple of times because that was a forbidden subject. And yet that was a real problem in her life. She lived alone. She'd get confused. She'd get frightened. She'd fall. She'd forget to take her pills. I mean, it was a major, major problem, this seemingly insignificant thing.
Hey, Paul, just to add on to that, another thing that we've seen is a very strong correlation is hearing. Mm-hmm. And if they lose their hearing, there's a clear ear-brain connection. And it's just as difficult to have that kind of conversation with a parent to say, "Hey, Mom or Dad, I think you need to go to an audiologist to have your hearing checked," because it may be the ear, or it may be the way your brain is processing that sound, especially in complex listening situations like a room full of people or a restaurant. And so that is just as much as, and even more so than a urinary tract infection, something that's more consistent and that you see happening later in life is our hearing loss and people not going for help. And I think the number is like 7 years before somebody will go get hearing aids. And I think some of it is vanity, you name it, and they just don't want to do it. But if you help them understand that this could be or may be causing some of that cognitive decline.
So when you guys give talks, you should bring me along because I'm the poster child for all of these things. My mother had Parkinson's. It turned into dementia and then was embarrassed. And the more she got like that, the more she didn't go out in public. My dad didn't want to take her out in public. They were embarrassed. She'd shake. She'd forget. And so the more isolated she became, it was just a death spiral. It really was a death spiral. She just got weaker and weaker and weaker and went downhill, and everything accomplished went with that. Then my aunt didn't have that problem, but she had continual urinary tract infections. And that led to her calling me in the middle of the night. "I'm confused. I'm scared. I don't know where something is. And I'm 2 hours away." When I stood, and she would literally call the police in the middle of the night, and they would break down the door, the fire department, just because she's confused or whatever. I mean, just crazy stuff like that. And then the last one you're talking about is my dad, who didn't suffer from mental decline, didn't have urinary tract infections, but had hearing loss. And he stopped going into public groups, and he stopped going out because couldn't hear everything. And I didn't know there's a correlation to him falling. He started falling more and more and more, and in fact fell and hit his head, and that's what eventually killed him. So I've been through all three of these things we've talked about. No issue. My doctor, their doctor, never warned me, hey, your Parkinson's might turn into dementia. Urinary tracts might cause mental cloudiness or confusion, and hearing loss may lead to falling. Nobody told me any of those things. And as I tried to talk about them with my loved ones or their physicians, everybody went, we got bigger issues. I've got a stroke. My aunt had cancer. My mom had something else. Those we talked about and dealt with. These mental health issues were rarely mentioned and not easy subjects to discuss with them or the doctor.
For sure.
So what's interesting is that in a patient with dementia is driven by the lack of what I call the use of your brain, right? It's kind of like use it or lose it.
Right.
When we're exercising, right? Our muscles, use it or lose it. Same thing with the brain. When we don't engage our brain, when our brain is not enriched with activities, right? And what I mean by enrichment is all the sensory perceptions that stimulate our brain.
Right.
Hearing is sensory perception. Vision is sensory perception, right? Taste, smell, touch. And when we lose the sensory stimulation, whether it's hearing, vision, taste, smell, touch, our brain cells aren't being exercised, right? Our brain cells is not being engaged. The brain cells are not talking to one another. And so this is why losing your sensory perception, especially hearing and vision, they're both risk factors for Alzheimer's and for dementia. And so these are fixable things.
Yeah,
a hearing aid, right? Maybe fixing your cataracts. These are fixable things. And yet we don't make the connection between these sensory perceptions and the risk of Alzheimer's.
You've talked about dental disease. Oh my goodness. And how that can lead to infections and it's right next to your brain. And
absolutely,
you don't think of good teeth as having anything to do with a good mental health, but it might.
So how would you know you're at risk unless you test?
Yeah.
So these cognitive devices, right? These 5 to 10 minute tests should be in every audiologist's office, every optometrist's office, where you can make that connection and screen
there's
folks.
A connection I never thought of. Yeah, right.
And you screen folks who are at risk, because if you are having problems up here, that's more of an incentive to fix your hearing. That's more incentive to get your glasses, to fix your vision, to get the cataract surgery. Because I can tell you that 90% of the time, hearing aids is driven by wives dragging their husbands into the office saying, he's not listening, he can't hear.
Right.
And that happens all the time.
Absolutely.
So we need to screen, we need to look. If we don't look, we can't fix. And so the way you look and screen are these computerized devices that doesn't.
So let's come back to let's bring it full circle. CogniView, are you the only ones with something like this out there? Are there lots of people doing stuff like that?
No, there's a few others out there. We're the first FDA cleared technology, and we have a significant amount of clinical data behind us, and we're in a number of studies and continuing to, refine the technology, refine the algorithm. And Dr. Trinh is involved in some of that with us too. But I do think it's not a matter of winners and losers with a cognitive testing device. We are such in an early stage of getting this to become a normal part of the conversation. We just want people to drive. We want doctors to do it, but people asking about it so that their doctor. And we think of it, Paul, in two ways. We have CogniView Thrive, which is a 5-minute screening we do sell to and put into audiologists, optometrists, retail pharmacies. That's a screening device that's much more consumer friendly, if you will. And then we have the CogniView Clarity device, which is the 10-minute assessment, which goes in the MD's office, primary care, family practice, internal medicine, or maybe even their neurologist or psychiatrist. So we try to make sure that there's the screening and then maybe more of a confirmatory test.
So I'm sure you're already on this, and maybe you've already gotten the steps in, but I've read more and more that CVS and chains like that are trying to be less, what would you call them? They used to sell makeup and hair and other sorts of, while you went in to get your pharmacy, that you had to walk through this aisle of other stuff, these little trinket and stuff. And my wife and my aunt used to love to do this. She'd stop at CVS, she'd go to get her pills, and she can come back with a bag full of stuff. But I've read that the current CEO of CVS, and I may have this wrong, but I think it's a woman, has said, no, we're going to become a health clinic.
Yeah.
We're going to do more testing. We're going to do more dispensing of COVID shots and other sorts of things, shingle shots and other things here. We're going to eventually try and sell products and services, not just makeup and candy.
And we're working with Rite Aid on a pilot right now with 100 independent pharmacies. Paul, there's 20,000 independent pharmacies in the country that are constantly trying to bring, in many instances in rural areas where they're the only clinician within miles of that patient.
No doctor.
We're working with independent pharmacies to bring this clinical value to them and to their patients as well.
Because when does my wife take her blood pressure? When she goes into CVS to pick up her regular prescription. There it is. She sticks it in. She won't do it at home, even though we've got the machine. But she's there, and it's easy and quick. I wonder if the same thing would be true if I could, while I'm standing in line waiting for the prescription to be filled, I could take a 10-minute test, a 5-minute test.
Yeah, we have Amina Abukar, who's the CEO of a company called Avant Institute and also runs her own pharmacies. She just got a Davos grant to put CogniView in 27 locations and working with the primary care doc in the market, because that's where I think it's got to go. It can't be just in pharmacies.
Yes.
It's got to be in conjunction with Dr. Trinh, right, in Southern California. It's got to be in conjunction with physicians in the community to really make it stick and make it.
So, Dr. Trinh, I have been to a million doctors through the years with my mom, with my aunt, with my dad. I try not to go very often. I'm old school. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to go see the doctor unless I break my arm. Then I got to go. But when I go, not one in all the doctors I've been to in all the years ever said, "Hey, why don't you take a quick cognitive test?" They're always pushing me to get blood work done. They're always testing me on a stress test or my heart once a year. And when I do the annual physical, they check my heart, they check my blood work, they check my stool sample maybe. Not one has ever said, let's check your brain.
And therefore, Alzheimer's is the number 3 death in Orange County, number 5 or 6 in the nation, and increasing. So there are 3 reasons why.
Okay.
Number 1, the average primary care doctor spends 7 minutes with you.
Exactly.
That's based on a national survey. Number 2, many docs also think that memory loss is normal with aging.
Yeah. Don't need to worry about that. Check that. That's just going to happen. Right. Yeah.
And number 3, they don't know what to do with the results.
Hey, bingo. So you found out. Now what? That was my early question. All right. Now we know.
Absolutely. So we are tasked with bringing awareness that there is a lot that can be done with the results, and that memory loss is not a normal thing with aging. And CogniView solves a lot of these issues because it's only a 5 or 10 minute screening test that the doctor does not need to do. The medical student or the medical assistant can do that.
Yeah, right.
So I believe that if you're already checking your blood pressure and you're checking your heart rate and the weight of a patient.
First 3 things they do: they weigh you, they take your blood pressure, and they check your heart rate. That's just a given.
A 5-minute, 10-minute cognitive test should be a vital sign.
Yes, right. Because isn't it vital to all the rest of your quality of life and all those other things? Yeah.
Yep. Memory testing should be a vital sign, especially if you can do it without the need of a psychologist or neurologist or a doctor in front of you. Should be a vital sign. It could be done by the medical.
So, Tom, can I give you a tough question now here? We're at the end of the show here. My late father, I'd love this. Whatever the problem in the world was, I'd say, I wonder why the world's like this. I wonder why the doctors do this. I wonder why everything's like this. He'd say, the answer's money. What was the question? It's money. Why? We're good Irish Catholics. Why don't they let priests get married? It's money. That's all he would say. Everything came down to money for him. So I wonder, and we've talked about this before with telehealth, for example. Part of the reason the doctors are resisting it, do they get paid for this? That time that they administer this or read this, is it worth their time? Is there a compensation? Are they resisting this just because there's no money in it? Or are they just not aware of it or know how to use it? Is money part of the problem?
I think it is, right? And I think it is so payers like those insurance companies, they generally speaking have no issue paying the specialist, the neurologist, the psychologist, psychologist, because the neuropsych, because they're the specialist specifically supposed to be doing cognitive testing. Primary care, where Dr. Trinh and I believe it should start, it's really dependent. The private payers, it's probably 50-50. Some pay for it, some don't. So I think that is a real barrier or challenge, in addition to what do we do now,
right?
Perspective of that physician.
So do we as customers go in and demand this of our doctors? I want this. What do you mean you don't have it? Do I have to go to another doctor that's more on top of the latest and greatest here? If patients demanded it, would doctors deliver it and then turn around and scream at the insurance company and say, look, I'm getting asked for this all the time here. I can't be sending people somewhere else.
Yeah, I think certainly a patient asking for it is a great step. And you got to be your own best advocate, self-advocate. So I absolutely think that needs to happen. What I will tell you is that doctor will probably do a mini cog, which is a 3-minute. And we already know, based on the American Association of Neurology, that that's fraught with human error, bias, and variability. But hey, listen, at least it's something, and it's heading in the right direction. So I certainly want the patients asking about it. And whatever that physician uses, do I wish it was Cognitive? Absolutely. But like I said before, this is a movement that is not only a healthcare issue, it's a society issue. And if we don't all start leading from the front, we're going to have a much bigger issue going down the road.
So when you must have salespeople in there, I don't know if they're calling on individual doctors or if they're just calling on health groups, and Dr. Trin's
calling on doctors. Yep.
All right. So you go into the doctor's office, hey, we want to show you something great. It's a great tool. Here's why you should be doing this. Here's how easy it is. You don't have to do it. The nurse practitioner, your physician's assistant can do this, just like they measure the weight, just like they measure the blood, just like they measure the blood pressure, whatever. Simple additional thing. And yes, it's going to give you more data. It's going to give you better results, and maybe even something that you'll get compensated for. It's another thing you can add to the little visit today here.
I'm going to sign you up, Paul.
Hit the cash register again. Ding. So all of these things are there. And I wonder what the doctor says. I can picture 3 things. And tell me if any of these are true. I don't know. I don't need that. Nobody asked for it. I don't know. More effort. I don't know if I'm going to get paid for it. Or 3, I get it. Even if I don't get paid for it, I should probably be doing this. But I don't know what to do with it. So what? There's a cognitive decline. So what? If there's a blood issue, I got a regimen I can follow. If there's a blood pressure issue, if there's a weight issue, there's something, I now have steps. You've given me a way to test for something. I don't know what to do with it.
So I think all 3 of those, but I want to make a real important point is physicians are there for a purpose, and they all are there to treat and take care of their patients. None of them do this or don't bring us a product like Cognitive in because they don't want to do more for their patients. So I want to be clear, they're always with the best intentions.
Right.
Some of the practicality of what we're talking about, whether it's the number of patients they see, or that there's not a prescription they can write, or there's not something that gets easily reimbursed, those are just very real, practical, real world issues that we have to deal with. But we're looking to work with those physicians to figure those things out and get those. But I do want to make sure that I'm not here to put down what the physicians do. They make a difference every day in patients' lives.
Absolutely. And I don't want to overemphasize it too, but we have a tendency to think that doctors are be turning into assembly lines. And it is a business. I get it. But it can't be just a business. It's a unique business where you're there to help lives. And most of these doctors, we would hope and believe that they went into it to serve and to help.
Absolutely.
Not just because this is better than opening a car wash, whatever. But I understand that money's part of it. And if it's too time consuming, if they don't get something in return, and if they don't know what to do with the results when they get them, all of those slow down their rate of adoption, even though you can probably convince them it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It gives you additional data. And at the end of the day, that's what you need. You're a scientist. You're trying to look at the data and come up with a solution.
Absolutely. And it's not the 5 minutes or 10 minutes testing, because let's say the 20 patients are going to see that day, 18 of them, don't score bad. They all do well.
Right.
It's the 2 that if Dr. Trin's number, which is 7 minutes per patient, if 2 of them need a 30 or 40-minute consultation after the test, that's where it kind of blows up their day. And they're trying to take care of all 20 patients, right? So I think that's some of the real world challenges that they deal with.
So is it an expensive product? Is it $80 million? Some of these machines, we had somebody in from Hoag Hospital, and I know I'm at the UCI, and they have their own great university system, but they were talking about some state-of-the-art cancer directed some sort of, I'm going to get this wrong, had something to do with radiation, and it was a very targeted kind of radiation machine. And it was millions and millions of dollars here.
No, we're definitely not in that realm. We're a few $100s a month for a device per month. And whether that doctor uses it one time or 150 times that month or 1,000 times, it's the same, a few $100s.
Okay.
And there's no upfront capital and there's no upfront fees. It's just a few $100 subscription per month.
There you go.
Very reasonable.
Okay. Yep. Well, I appreciate this show so much because he's always opening my eyes to what's out there. Telehealth, mental health, cognitive devices that can do this, regimens to clean your upper nasal passage and make sure the stuff doesn't get into your lung. Wild things that I just seem like such obvious ideas, but like all ideas, they take a while to get people. We're all old horses. We only go a certain way at a certain speed. And yeah, I know you can whip me and encourage me, but I'm only going to go so fast, so far. Patients, doctors, all this stuff is slow to adopt. I hope it will open people's eyes to the importance of getting mental health checkups and cognitive tests. And it should eventually become as commonplace as a blood pressure test, I would think.
Should be the next vital sign.
Next vital sign. I like that.
That would be our goal, the next vital sign. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, Dr. Trinh, take us out. What final thoughts here as we do? Oh, give us the name, the site and everything again here. Give us the company and the site if people want to learn more.
Cogniview.com.
Spell that for the cognitively impaired, the spelling impaired.
COGNIVUE.com. Great site. Folks can always contact me to get more information as well. They know how to contact me on the show.
Yeah.
And then we will work on getting this device out into the community so that this can become the next vital sign.
You know, that would be a fun thing. You do these talks like you just did one this past weekend. You had a couple hundred people show up, as they often do with these things at some church or wherever you give these things. And I wonder if there would be kind of some free demos as part of these talks. Or come up and try this thing, because maybe there's a certain resistance. I don't know. Am I going to like this? Is it going to hurt? Is it? Am I going to feel uncomfortable?
Absolutely. And we did that last Saturday.
You did?
We had over 50 people signed up to do the Cogniview test. So it was a good event, and we highlighted the need for this test.
Well, thanks for the work you do. Tom O'Neill, another good Irishman with a good idea here.
Thank you, Dr. Trinh. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Tom. See you guys later.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it, folks. Another great reason that you got to tune into this show. There's stuff out there. There's solutions coming. There are ideas trying to be born here to give us more ideas, more information, more treatments, more techniques to take control of our own health and to live a healthier and happier life. Right here in Orange County's only community radio station, octalkradio.net. Streaming live from our studios here at the University of California, Irvine's Beale Applied Innovation Center, which is filled with all sorts of medical devices and things like this. Tune in, we'll tell you more.